Hello and welcome to SwitzerTV Property. I'm Peter Switzer, and with the economy getting the good news that only 3 million, not 6 million workers needed the JobKeeper payment, and the stock market now surging out of bear market territory, we talked to one of Australia's biggest developers, Tim Gurner, and we asked him how he became one of Australia's biggest developers, and we asked him what he's seeing in the property sector right now. This guy sells a lot of apartments, so his view on where the market is going, the property market is a really insightful one. And then property doomsday Dr. Steve Keen has a surprise view on where he thinks house prices are going. So I won't keep you waiting anymore. Let's cross to my interview with Steve Keen. Well, joining me on the program is a mate of mine who's quite renowned for being uncontroversial. His name, of course, is Professor Steve Keen. And his latest suggestion, which drew attention in the Daily Mail publication, where he said that he wants the Australian government to give everybody $100,000 with conditions. I couldn't help but pursue him, and I thought he'd be in Amsterdam, but now he resides in Thailand, in a place called Trang. And once again, I'm not surprised that my old mate Steve Keen could be doing that. Steve, great to see you.
Good to see you too, mate.
All right, so we'll talk about why you're in Thailand later.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you've always been controversial when it comes to economic matters. And sometimes you've been absolutely right, sometimes you haven't always been right, but when you're making big calls, it can happen. But this is an interesting one. You're suggesting that the government should find $100,000, is that right, for every individual, adult or household or what? What are you trying to say and why?
What I'm looking at is the level of household debt in Australia. And if you actually look at how much we owe, it works out to $100,000 per household, just under $100,000 per person, not per household. And that household debt has basically done only one thing, and you can guess what it's done. It's driven up Australian house prices. It's done bugger all otherwise. It's been money, if I can use French in your program, can I?
Yes.
It's money pissed. Okay, it's money pissed up against a wall. Okay, you're paying for expensive property. It's all been financed by debt. That's what caused the financial crisis back in 2008. It's what caused the bubble beforehand as well. The fact that Australia's debts continue increasing after the crisis is why it looks like it's been a healthy economy. But now that we have the coronavirus, there's one reason I think Australia might actually do well out of this, by the way, and Australian house prices too. But we're facing a huge financial crunch. It's mainly because we're carrying this ridiculous level of household debt. What we need to do is get rid of bank-created money and replace it with government-created money, and we could do it by the stroke of a few pens.
So how many billions are we required to do this, Steve?
I'll give you the exact figure in a moment. And the answer is about, let's see, hang on a second. 2.3 billion.
2.3 billion will give every one of us $100,000.
And it would all be done on paper. Okay, it's a paper transaction because there'd be government creating money by doing what is actually now happening in England. And I don't know many people are aware of this, but the English Treasury is being financed directly by the Bank of England. So they're putting out all this money, like something in the order of £300 billion they're creating to finance their way through the coronavirus. And they're simply saying, here's £300 billion worth of bonds. The Treasury prints them up on their printer, and the banker said, that's good, we'll take them off your books, and here's £300 billion we're going to put in your account for you to spend on the public. It's just a paper transaction.
What will the people be instructed to do with that $100,000?
What I'd be doing is twofold. First of all, it'd go on a per capita basis. You would get as much as me, not a cent more, not a cent less. Ditto with Rupert Murdoch, if you still call himself an Australian. Everybody gets exactly the same amount of money. Those who have debt, it's used to write off their debt, reduce their debt level. Those that don't get debt would get a cash injection that I would preferably restrict to being used to buy newly issued corporate shares, where those corporate shares would have to use to pay down corporate debt. And the whole idea is to reduce the debt burden by roughly 100% of GDP, because we currently owe, as households and corporations in Australia, roughly 200% of GDP is the private sector debt level, about 6 times the government debt level everybody else worries about.
Because I know you are a fitness fanatic, I know I don't have to say to you, what have you been smoking, Steve? Because I know you're not smoking, and it's always very dangerous for Australians to have anything to do with drugs in an Asian country, and you're not stupid. But people watching this would be saying, has Steve really lost his marbles? This seems like too way out an idea for any government to really seriously consider. How would you respond?
I would say it is too way out an idea for any government to consider, okay, which is why I haven't bothered pushing it, even though I put it forward about 10 years ago as a way of getting out of the financial crisis. Because what we've allowed to happen is talk about what you've been smoking. Mate, you've been smoking the weed on this front. You've been sitting back watching house prices rise and not even worrying, or even not even asking what's the level of household debt that's driving it. Now, I've been saying, for God's sake, put the smoking utensils aside, take off the rose-coloured glasses and look at the level of household debt. And that's what's been driving the whole damn system. So I'm saying we've been behaving in a stoned fashion. I want to get us unstoned and get back to government money rather than bank money. Bank money.
I'm starting to think of Fred Flintstone at the moment, Steve. But the thing that gets me on this argument is you say that the money has purely driven prices, but a lot of houses have been built, and that has a multiplier effect. That has employment. You know, I've recently interviewed Tim Gurner, the significant developer. I guess he's like the young Harry Triggerboff. And he was saying because of the coronavirus, you know, a couple of thousand people won't be employed until we get back developing again. So it's not just a household debt thing generating prices, Steve. There is economic growth that happens with it as well.
Yeah, there have been some houses built as well. I won't deny that, obviously. Some of them have even stayed up for more than a month without cracking. Sorry. But I would rather be building factories, machinery, technology than building houses and making the prices rise. And if you take a look at the numbers, and you know I'm a numbers man, and of course I'm going to show you some numbers in a while. We do a bit of screen sharing here. Most of that increase in money has simply made houses more expensive. And one fascinating thing about being in Trang now, being in Asia, is that you go for a meal here, it's dirt cheap. Why is it dirt cheap? Partly because people are paying trivial amounts of money to buy houses or to rent them. We're mainly keeping our rentier class alive. We're making it impossible to build manufacturing. And after the coronavirus, we've got to rebuild Australian manufacturing to have any hope on the planet whatsoever.
Steve, you make the point that Australia is lined up for a significant financial crunch because of the coronavirus. Talk us through that.
Okay. Actually, I can probably show you better with American data on this front because the globe is facing it. And this is because Australia is not unique in having a ridiculously high level of private debt. It's a global phenomenon. And what's actually happening now is because there's such an unusual crisis. This is a crisis, obviously, I did not predict. Okay. And it's a crisis which comes at the consumer side of the economy rather than the investor side. If you think about a normal financial crisis, it's too much money going in some gambling area like American housing or whatever else. The whole thing falls over. People start losing money. The investment sector collapses, which is about 30% of GDP, and drags the consumer section down. This time round, workers have been told they can't go to work. That's 70%. So it's much, much bigger. And what you're finding, and I can show you some American data on this front. I'll just get the data ready before I swap screens here. But this is showing what's happening right now in the level of corporate debt in America. This is with a very fascinating database called the St. Louis Fred database. So give me a sec to share the screen here. This is from the Fred database. This is the level of commercial and industrial loans in the United States. You can see there's been a rising trend. This is back in 75, came down during the financial crisis, about 1.2 trillion. Here it's about 2.4 trillion before the crisis began, and that's in the last 4 weeks. Okay, now what you've got is pretty close to $1 trillion increase in commercial debt. Why? Not because corporations are investing, far from it. Their cash flows dried up and they're basically running up the overdraft. So when we get to the other side of it, there's going to be a massive increase in debt for the private sector, and it's quite possible they could go bust in trying to pay those levels of debt back.
Any of the extension of credit from the Federal Reserve?
The Fed's doing an enormous amount as well, but what the Fed is really doing is deferring debts. It's saying to households, you don't have to pay the debt now, you can pay it later. But what happens in the meantime, of course, is the principal remains there and the interest you haven't paid gets stacked onto the principal. And what you've got therefore is people are going to go through a bit of a debt paying holiday for a while now, wherever this has been done. And I'm glad that it has been done. But when it comes to the other end, bang, your debt's higher. If they compound the interest you haven't paid and immediately that's higher as well, we could hit a really serious financial shock out of this. And if we don't, we've got to find some way of stopping it.
So, Steve, as you know, there has been a lot of money thrown at the solution to all of this. Has the magnitude of the stimulus and the central bank extension of credit surprised you?
It has, in the sense that every time I'm arguing for ways of curing far past mistakes we've made, and I get told this can't be done, that's impossible, this can't be done, and bang, a crisis happens and it's done overnight. So, I've been arguing for a universal basic income to some extent to give people cash flows so they can pay their costs during a crisis like this. And bang, it's happened. The British government's doing it. The Americans have done it to some extent. Australia's done a better job on that front. New Zealand better still. So all this stuff which has been impossible has suddenly become possible instantly. And it's been said that it can't be done. No, it isn't. It can't. It's we don't have the will to do it until a crisis like this hits.
As you know, right around the world, they're trying to go back to work. The fingers are crossed that there won't be a serious second wave infection. And anyone who thinks he knows exactly what's going to happen is guessing.
That's definitely smoking something.
So we don't know what's going to. We don't know what's going to happen. And as you would expect, I'm hoping for the optimistic. I don't know what you're hoping for, but I'm hoping from the optimistic from this point of view. That, like you, I know an enormous amount of money has been thrown at this, and if we do get back to work quicker than expected, and there isn't a serious second wave shock, therefore all that money in the system could also lead to a lot of economic growth. What's your response to that?
It's not enough. Okay, even the money's been done, and I'm glad it has been done, it hasn't been sufficient. So people have been getting like 80% of their wages being paid out of some of these schemes. The Americans, I think, limited to $1,200 for a very low limit of time. People are going to come out of this with less cash than they went in, while they've still got the same financial commitments when you get back to work again. So I don't think enough has been done. And the thing is, it is just a paper transaction. This is all the government putting one number on one side of a balance sheet, another over there. It's all accounting. It isn't a case we've got to get the money from somewhere else. And that belief we have to, that's the main danger we face, I think, we're going forward, thinking that we can't do it. We can.
What you'll be happy to know is that after this interview, I'm interviewing the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. So I'll just see if he thinks it's as easy as you think it is.
Steve, he wouldn't know what he's talking about. He's a politician.
Oh,
and they don't.
He was a lawyer and an investment banker, so we'll give him some credit, mate.
Some credit, but not understanding macroeconomics, and that's where half these hassles come from.
Okay, now, the question a lot of people would be asking, why is Steve in Thailand anyway?
Okay, the reason being, I had a choice of 4 countries I could have stayed in. Australia, obviously, which I was back in March visiting my mother. I think you're aware. We caught up. UK, the Netherlands, where I own a flat, and my girlfriend is 25 years in Europe, but she was born in Thailand. And I was looking at the numbers, and an absolutely disastrous performance in the UK. Netherlands suddenly went pear-shaped as well. Australia was doing okay, but we're not actually married, so I couldn't bring my girlfriend down here without running into visa issues. Thailand was looked perfect because I thought if we get here soon enough, they'll close the borders and they won't be making tourists leave. Well, that's actually what's happened, and And Thailand started off as number 2 after China in terms of the number of cases, ranking a country that is now about number 60. And the number of new cases in the UK every day until just recently has been exceeding the total number of cases in Thailand. Only 3,028 cases in a population of 60 million. So it's done a better job in controlling the virus than Australia or New Zealand have done.
Shout for skin cancer, because you aren't built for that wonderful weather in Thailand. But I've got to ask you the one last question, Steve. What happens to Australian house prices as a consequence of the coronavirus?
Okay, that's one fascinating thing. I would normally have said they're going to get trashed, and certainly on the debt side of things, that's highly likely. There'll be a inability to cover the mortgages and so on. However, one thing which has happened with the coronavirus is that the countries that have succeeded in suppressing it are forming a very interesting patchwork across the globe. Australia's one, and China is one of the others. Now, one of the ones that hasn't controlled the virus is Canada. And so if you imagine the two main destinations of China's buying of overseas housing has been Vancouver and Sydney. Now, no Chinese in their right mind is going to be buying a place in Vancouver. They may well be selling up there, given the fact that they don't think they can go back there anymore because it's virus affected. That could double or treble the foreign buying pressure for Sydney and the Australian cities. So ironically, I think Australia might do well in house prices, but it shouldn't. It should try to get the damn things down and build a manufacturing sector, which it lacks.
Steve Keen is predicting higher house prices in Australia. Go figure that. That'll
throw you, won't it?
Thanks for joining us on the program, Steve.
Welcome, Matt. Good to be here. Good to chat to you.
Same here, mate.
Well, all of us Australians who own properties or a property could be a little bit toey at the moment with the implications of coronavirus. But a guy who owns a lot of property, and that's his business, is Tim Gurner of Gurner TM. How are you, mate?
Good, Peter. How are you?
Very good. Now, is that the name of the business? Everywhere I go in Melbourne, I see Gurner TM.
It's actually a funny one. I don't know if I've told you in the past, but I had we had this branding session. I said to the branders, whatever you do, don't put my name in it. And they presented Gurner. I'm like, I told you not to put the name in it. And they said, give us another crack. And they came back and put the TM. And I thought, maybe it actually looks like a brand. Maybe we can run with it. So that's where the TM came from.
But it does stand out, and it actually is memorable. The fact that you've done that. I'm toying with SwitzerTV myself now as a consequence.
They'll charge you some trademark.
Now, mate, look, I know who you are, but the people watching this may well, like me, seen the signs around Melbourne and Brisbane. You haven't built in Sydney, have you?
We've got a site in Sydney. We haven't been there yet. Back about 5 years ago, I came up and had a look around, and I thought it was way too expensive, and I was wrong. It ended up being 3 or 4 times more expensive 2 years later. So we've got a site up there. We will do, and we'd like to come up there subject to what happens in the market in the next little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. So therefore, the first question is a really relevant one. Who is Tim Gurner? Like, where did you come from? Like, you don't look as old as Harry Triguboff, but Harry was once young. I know that. I was young when he was, I guess, middle-aged, so he would have been young. So where did you come from, Tim? How did you end up in development?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's obviously not in my family. So my mum was CEO of Berry Street Child Welfare for 30 years. I'm the capitalist of the family, and she's the non-for-profit. My dad was an engineer, structural engineer and landscape design, which he loved. My dad passed away when I was 18. Actually 19, but when I just started my first business. My uncle was in property. He had a lot to do with property trusts, but never actually really property development as such. So I was lining up. I finished school at Carey Grammar, and I was lining up to go to university, and I wanted to be an osteopath. I don't know if I told you that before, Peter, but
you look like an osteopath. You know,
you
got that trendy new age.
You know, I can fix your body type of look about you. But go on.
See, maybe I missed my calling, and I actually enrolled with it at Melbourne Uni, and then my mum pulled me aside one day and said, "Look, I'm not so sure you're made to sit in a room and deal with people one-on-one. Your concentration's about 1 minute. And I think you should look at something else." So she convinced me to go to Melbourne Uni. I lived at Queen's College and studied business there, which was a great thing. I I'm an incredibly terrible student. I think I went to probably 3 lectures in that whole time. We were having way too much fun at college, misbehaving. So wasn't a good student, but I always wanted to get into business. And halfway through that, I went from full-time to part-time and started work with a guy called Tony Pride, which was Wilson Pride Real Estate. They were doing a lot of sales at the time, but Tony was doing some private development on the side. And I started getting into that. And, you know, I'd always loved property. I remember when I was only 12 years old, mum and dad were redoing the garden, and I faked a sickie for about a month straight so I could sit there and watch the bulldozers move the garden around and the soil and everything. And I've just always loved the creation and the change and all the design elements, which obviously comes from my dad. And, you know, just creating things has always been my big thing. So it was great with Tony. We had an amazing relationship, and he's been a really big mentor for me over the years. He sort of taught me, because he was in sales as well, you know, how you really work out what people need and what they want. And then by knowing that, you can then create the product for them. So that was an amazing period for me. I then decided I didn't really want a boss. I wasn't very good at being told what to do or listening. So I
You sound like a very troublesome human being. You know?
You didn't follow the course that you wanted to do. You didn't turn up to university lectures. You weren't a good student. you couldn't take orders, but you still turned out okay. I like you, but still, go on.
I think the concentration, was my biggest problem. I always wanted to be doing different things the whole time. And so I started a gym, actually. So when I was with Tony, I saw this opportunity in Elwood, and I started a gym called My Wellbeing, which was mainly focused on personal training. And it actually came out of a story when I was living with this girl in Brighton. I wasn't together with her, but she was this crazy hippie, and she was an amazing girl. And I was coming home like every young kid does, complaining about work. I was working too hard, not getting paid enough. And she just said, well, I don't understand it. What do you love to do? And I said, I love to train. I love the gym. And I want my own business. She said, oh, that's pretty simple. You just got to start a gym. And I said, oh, well, I don't think you can just start a gym. And she's like, well, why not? Other people have. And within a month, I'd signed on to this gym premise in Elwood. I then found out that you had to have a gym license, which I didn't realise. So I had to do that at night to study that. Then I had council turn up and said, you know, you can't put a gym here. You got a shop permit. And I said, oh, what's a permit? So then I had to work out what that meant. And it all just slowly came together. And within about 3 or 4 months, we opened. And yeah, it was an amazing time. I was getting up at 5 o'clock, training people from 6 till 9, doing paperwork and marketing from 9 till 5, and then training people 5 till 9 at night, 6 days a week. So it was pretty brutal, full on. But I learned more in that first 6 months than I would have learned at 3 years at uni, without any doubt. I built that business up pretty quickly in about 2 years, but it was a pretty hard run, because a month after I started the business, I took a loan for 150 grand from National Australia Bank. I had no money, I had no security. This is back in the day when they used to give loans to businesses without having, direct hard assets as well, back in the day, a long time ago. And my dad passed away 4 weeks into, we literally opened the gym. 4 weeks later, my dad died of cancer. And it was an incredibly hard time, because we lost my dad and then 3 grandparents over the next 3 months. And I was very, very close with my dad, and it was a difficult time, because I'd had this big loan. The business hasn't even started. I was only 4 weeks into it. And, we got interest clicking and rents clicking, and I don't really know what I'm doing as well, you've got to remember. And so I had to sort of make a call, do you let it all go, or do you get back in there and have a real crack? And I obviously decided that I need to get in there and have a real crack. So that was by far the best thing I've ever done, because it was just me. I was 100% independent, because obviously my mum and my sister were going through a pretty tough time as well. So it was all me by myself, and I had to make it work. And the work ethic that I developed through that is definitely why I am here today, because there was no way anything was going to stop me from succeeding. I was just going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing until we made a success of it. And that's exactly what we did. And sort of 18 months later, there was a guy who I knew always wanted the space, and I approached him and said, I've got a developed business now. It's ready to go. Why don't you buy it from me? And within a couple of months, I sold it to him. And it's not like we made a huge fortune out of it at all, but we paid out the bank and made a little bit of money. And then I was able to get back into what I really wanted to do, which was property. And after that, I actually started with a group, FKP, which is, you'd remember, as a very large public company at that time. I started there. After 9 months, I decided that getting a $300 ad approved, the fact that I had to go through 15 lines of approval that was not an environment I wanted to be in. Public companies definitely not suited to my mentality. And I approached this crazy guy called Moritz, who you know well, Peter. He was a classic, you know, crazy creative developer. The reason why I liked him and what he was doing is I'd heard very good things about his ethics and his morals, and he was doing a project called 401 St Kilda Road at the time. And this was when everyone was doing, you know, $2.99 plus the cheapest product physically possible, just get it in as cheap as possible. And I remember Maury had this huge banner for 401 St Kilda Road called Worth Every Million. And I remember looking at it thinking, an apartment, how's a developer going out there saying worth every million? You've got to be pretty ballsy. And I called him up and said, look, I reckon you're amazing. Can we catch up for a coffee? And I caught up for a coffee with him. He wasn't really employing anyone. He was really a one-man band with a couple of people helping him, and met him. And then the next day I started with him, and it was just an incredible journey. He's been him and Tony also have been real father figures and mentors to me as well. I've been very fortunate. I've had some amazing people in my career that have really helped me through tough times.
Do you think it was
a part of your success story that you actually did target someone like Schwartz and say, can I talk to you? Will you give me a chance? Because a lot of people hold themselves back and they never really open the door that will either give them success or close the door on the possibility.
Oh, absolutely. If I hadn't made that call, I wouldn't be here. There's no way. I wouldn't have been able to start my own business. I wouldn't have all the things I have in my life and my wife and my family without Maury. There's no doubt. He not only did he give me an opportunity to come in and grow, Maury was an amazing guy, because the day I started, he came and gave me a folder and said, here you go, here's 401 St Kilda Road, the most complex high-end building that had been done in Melbourne. I'd never done it before. And I remember I got the file and I opened the file and I'm like, oh my God, I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. Like literally had no clue what I was doing. I obviously pretended to him I had every idea what I was doing. And I had to sort of, work it out myself. And I got, people say you got thrown in the deep end, I got thrown in the ocean. And it was the best thing that could have ever happened for me, because I had to survive myself. And, within 6 months' time, I actually had a small percentage of that business. And within a couple of years, I had 30% of that business pan-urban. And for me, that period, Maury is just the most amazing creative mind, and he gave me the ability to see outside the box.
Yeah. Now,
what was the first development that you did by yourself?
1810 Malvern Road it was. It was 15 townhouses. I could still draw you the floor plans today. It had this crazy green mosaic facade. That was the first one I did by myself.
Yeah, and over the years, you've developed something that's quite distinctive, so people know it's a Gurner type product. What is it that you think differentiates you from your rivals, and where did that competitive difference or advantage, I'm sure you call it advantage, and given your success it certainly has been an advantage, but where did it come from and what is it?
I think it's a love of design, to be honest. I mean, I think in our industry, like any business is incredibly brutal, whether you're selling coffees or selling apartments. And if you don't love what you do, then I think you should get out of it straight away. I mean, whenever people ask me about getting into business, I say, well, you want to earn 3 to 4 times what you could in a wage, and you'd want to love it, because it's going to be terrible most of the time and it's going to be a really hard test. And for me, design is everything for me. I absolutely love creating things. I love brands. Brands are a big thing for me. We've taken a lot of inspiration from all those incredible fashion brands that do it so well around the world. And so for us, it's every single project. We look at how can we create point of difference. So our number one thing in the office, every single time we go to launch is, okay, we did really well at Hawkeburn, but forget about that. How do we do it better and more different? So we go to St. Moritz, and everyone says, oh, you won't be able to do it better than Hawkeburn. St. Moritz, we totally recreate a whole new world, and we had more success there than we could have ever had. And it's not always just about high end, it's about being appropriate to its location too. So when we're in Collingwood, it's very much meat packers, New York. And then when we're in St Kilda on the beach, it's more Miami. I take a lot of inspiration from hotels and service offering in hotels, and just trying to create the ultimate lifestyle. That's what it is. I guess we try to position the brand as a lifestyle residential product rather than just an apartment in a location.
So let's just quickly concentrate on St. Moritz. For people who aren't in Melbourne, it's the old Novotel Hotel at St Kilda. Are you knocking the whole thing down and starting from scratch, or are you using parts of the existing hotel? And then tell us what the offering is going to be. You've sold everything there already, haven't you?
Yeah, so St. Moritz was obviously the place of the old St. Moritz ice rink, which was an incredibly important Melbourne icon. Unfortunately, it burnt down back in the 80s, and then the Novotel, which was a pretty hideous building, was built in the early 1990s. It was a building that definitely the locals did not like, so they were very happy for us to knock it over. So the building is knocked over. We're down to the bottom of the basement, so massive 3-level basement across a 7,000 square metre site. And now we're coming back up. We actually just poured the bottom level of basement yesterday. So very exciting project, 132 apartments, very large apartments, all downsizer, big owner occupier product. We averaged about $4.5 million. So there's $500 million worth of revenue across 130 apartments. And we've got some very, very large, very amazing apartments throughout the project. And we average size of about 180 square metres for an apartment, which is a very, very large home.
And what was the most expensive apartment in the complex?
We don't talk about that.
Oh, come on.
There's a penthouse with a price of $30 million that's not available for sale.
Yeah,
but
okay.
to be honest, everyone talks about that one a lot.
Yeah. It's newsworthy, and we're in news.
Yeah, I think you'll see, Peter, that when it gets resolved at the end and finished, I think you'll see there's some pretty big names and pretty amazing apartments in the complex.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I've seen your stuff. It's certainly high end, and you do show appreciation for design. What's the scariest moment you had? Because when you do these projects, we're talking many millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, and you clearly have to be supported by banks because, as you pointed out, no one left you $1 billion. So what's been the scariest moments for you as a developer, Tim?
Yeah, it's interesting. My scariest debt moment was actually that first $150,000 I had for the business, for the gym, because that was totally unsecured. I didn't know what I was doing. And at the time, I thought it was okay when I took it until I realised that I had to pay it back. Just I was pretty young and pretty dumb at the time. That was pretty scary, but I think Brisbane was probably the biggest. I mean, we went up to Brisbane into a different state. We went and bought a very, very large site there, and we proposed to do 3 30-storey towers, 992 apartments, plus a hotel and retail. That is big for anyone. That's big for Harry and anyone in the world, really. And I remember we had ANZ there, and I was 31 at the time, and I was trying to raise, I think we were 300 million for the first 2 towers from ANZ, and we're about 60 million cash we were trying to raise at the time. And I remember that we had the whole credit team of ANZ, 30 of them standing there, and this one lady said to me, "So Tim, what makes you think you can deliver this when no one else has ever?" I'm like, "Oh, it's a very good question." And I started to, explain what we were doing. And then I think her question really made me realise, geez, this is a big project. It's a big, complex thing out of our hometown. And that project ended up being incredibly complex and incredibly difficult. And, 3 30-storey towers, it was over 6 years. So we went through different cycles in Brisbane as well, which is something that we'll probably try never to do again. I think that was our biggest lesson, that, completing a building in a similar market cycle is what you want to be doing. You don't want to be starting 6 years later. As you know, anything can be happening. And the Brisbane market, when we went up there, was at the bottom. It got to the top, and it got back down to the bottom within about 18 months, 24 months. So that was a huge test for us up there. And I remember one distinct moment. We raised money through Thakral, which is a Singapore listed entity, $46 million cash to start the project. And we did the deal, and I was sitting there rerunning the numbers, and I was doing the numbers myself on my desk, and I pressed the number to get to the final result of feasibility, and it was negative, which was not really what it's meant to be. And I walked outside and I threw up in the garden bush next door, because I had so much anxiety and so much stress about something I thought was resolved, and it was a very different position. Luckily, we spent the next few weeks getting it back to where it needed to be, but I remember that very, very distinctly.
The coronavirus challenge and the idea that a government, like all governments in the world, would close down and send people home and not be able to go to work, and everything's changed. That would have been something you could never have contemplated in all your risk management for the projects that you've got on the boil right now.
Yeah. I mean, we always, I'm pretty risk adverse. I come from a family of not major risk takers, and we try to line up risk very carefully, and we expect to have cycles where property prices drop significantly, and we expect to have settlement issues, and we expect to not be able to get funding and have issues the whole time. I mean, my job is virtually just putting out fires the entire time. My wife, if you asked her, she'd say my best skill set is problem solving. That is what I do day in, day out. I don't know how you problem solve a global coronavirus, which has had much more of a drastic effect than I think anyone could have ever imagined 8 weeks ago. And unfortunately, I think it's still got a long way to run yet.
Experiencing supply problems, because if you're high end, you're not getting everything made in this country. Some stuff has to be coming from overseas. Is that causing a delay and a problem for your developments?
Yeah, look, we were very fortunate. I just finished 2 big buildings in Melbourne, so glass and everything that we needed was here. And St. Moritz were at the early stages, and Victoria and Vine as well were at the early stages. So we were just very fortunate. We were finishing jobs and starting them. But, stone out of Italy, of course, there would have been issues through that period. There was a very short window where China stopped exporting glass, but that's obviously opened up again pretty quickly, and those factories are now fully going. So we have been fortunate that we haven't felt it too badly. And I think the Australian government in particular has realised that this could get very, very serious if they don't allow exports to come in and imports in and exports out. And I think that's been okay to date. The supply part has been okay, thank God.
How have the banks been treating you over this period?
Yeah, look, good. I think I'm very fortunate. I've got a very strong relationship with ANZ. I do all my construction lending through ANZ and some through CBA and NAB as well. They've been good. I mean, it's early days though, Peter, as you know. I mean, we are very fortunate that we have a large portfolio with ANZ. We just paid down a very substantial amount of that when we finished 2 jobs. We actually paid out Albert Place in 3 days, and Hawkesbury we paid out in 1 day. So that's the kind of stuff that gives them confidence and allows them to be confident. And ANZ's position to date, and all the banks I've been talking to, is we're here to help you, and we're here to make sure that you get through this strongly, and we'll do whatever we can to help. Now, is that going to stay the same forever? I very much doubt it, because they're going to have to, at some point, rein in some of the flexibility they've been giving. But for me, so far, it's been very good. I guess what we're seeing, though, Peter, probably much more worrying for me and more relevant is the end purchase of retail funding.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, so that, without doubt, is getting absolutely smashed. There's no question. I mean, now, if you're a doctor, if you're in medical, if you're in hospitality, if you're in hotels, even if you own a commercial office building, they're not taking into account bonuses and stuff that they used to take into account, which is very alarming, because we had that horrible contraction when the Royal Commission happened already in terms of lending procedures. I think that went way too far, without doubt. And it was just starting to, wasn't anywhere near back to what it was. It was just starting to ease, and now they've just clamped it all back down again. And I think the government is, I don't envy them. It's not an easy time, but they have to be so incredibly careful over the next 6 to 12 months. I think this September, October period, when JobKeeper finishes and, the bank's sort of leeway or flexibility stops, I think is a very, very important time to watch.
Tell me this, Tim, how many people in an ordinary year, when you've got your normal sort of projects happening, how many people do you think would be employed because of you, either directly by you or through the contractors that you work with? How many employees would be sort of connected to Gurner projects?
Oh, it's thousands.
Right.
So is it likely then, because of the coronavirus and all the challenges out there, that you're going to be slow to start up new projects because it's just so hard to work out what's going on?
Well, Pete, we've had to put 2 projects on hold. We had a very, very large scale project coming to the market in August, 350 apartments, which would create upfront, if you look at what development does, I mean, we are property in Victoria is 48% of state revenue, and it is a major player, and it is an essential part of the Victorian economy. And when I put a job on hold, architects don't get paid, structural engineers don't get paid, contamination guys don't get paid, let alone the builders and the trades and the flow-on effect. I mean, the construction industry is terrified by what's going on. I mean, there are no big jobs out in the market, there's nothing being tendered, and there's nothing coming. And the government's got to be very, very careful. I mean, particularly Victoria, where we are driven by, it's all about construction and property. And, they were talking about pre-COVID, the stamp duty was down 660 billion because of all those stupid changes they made around foreign purchases in terms of off-the-plan savings. And it's that classic Labor Liberal argument at the moment of Labor, we're going to tax more, but they don't think about how much quantity's fallen off. I mean, they need to get back to quantity getting up, and off the plan stamp duty and foreign stamp duty at the levels it is now, which is at world record highs. It's just got to be the stupidest thing our government could be doing.
Tim, if you had to give some advice to the Prime Minister around what you hope will happen, as a person who does employ a lot of people directly, what would you like to say to him?
Look, I think the key at the moment is definitely the retail funding. We've got to be really careful we don't clamp down too tight. I understand that the banks have to stay strong, and that's a very important part for us. But if they don't let people refinance and let people get through this period where rentals are tougher, because the rental market has definitely taken a hit. I think the biggest thing, though, without doubt, is immigration. Like if we don't get these students back, I think it's 1.5 million students that we need to get back into our universities, let alone the 400,000 we need every single year. If that doesn't happen and doesn't get reignited heavily by the start of next year, the flow-on effect for the economy would be devastating. Like we have 150,000 people coming to Melbourne every single year, and that is what allows us to build buildings, to feed jobs, to get the trades going, to keep our unis going, our hospitals going. I mean, if immigration stops, it'll be diabolical. They have to focus on immigration.
And so what have you been seeing on the price front, Tim? Have you been actively, since the coronavirus really closed down the economy and locked up the people, have you been trying to sell any products? And if so, what kind of reaction have you been getting?
Yeah, we're kind of fortunate. We've got Victorian Vine, which is 250 apartments. We've only got 3 left. St. Moritz, we've only got 2 left. Atelier in Collingwood, we've got 10 left. That we've still been doing a few sales, but it has definitely, I mean, that first 2 to 3 weeks of chaos, which we will all never forget ever. I mean, people didn't want to go outside. So, of course, if they don't want to go outside, the last thing they're thinking about is buying a property, particularly off the plan. So sales volumes have fallen off a cliff, there's no question. We have seen a big uptick, though, in the last couple of weeks. Inquiries definitely a lot better. It's not back to pre-COVID levels, but I think, it's going to be, I think until we get through that September to December period where people work out what's really happening, I think the opportunistic investors will buy, but I think people are going to be pretty cautious for a period of time.
Before we wind up, I've just got to relive that fantastic smashed avocado story that you got embroiled in. Why don't you just help us relive that wonderful viral experience?
I try extremely hard not to relive that. Thank you. So it was a funny one. It was not at all what got reported. I mean, obviously what got reported got a lot of coverage, but I was invited to speak with them about the property market. It was me, Triggerboff, and Malcolm Turnbull, the current Prime Minister at the time, and they said, we want a bit of an update on the property market. You're the sort of leading Melbourne. We've got Triggerboff in Sydney, and then we've obviously got Prime Minister. And
those 60 minutes we're talking about?
Yeah, I try not to mention their name. 60 minutes it was. And from our perspective, it was meant to be just a property market update. They came down, we did 4.5 hours of interview. He was a lovely guy who did the interview, got on really well. I said to the girls before I started, I said, look, the key thing for me here is I just don't want to look like a wanker, a rich wanker telling people what to do. That was my exact words. And we got off, we finished the filming 4.5 hours. I said, how'd we go? And Ash, who does all our PR, said, no, you absolutely nailed it. It was perfect. It was really, really good. And through the time, one of the throwaway questions, it was 4.5 hours of interview. One throwaway question was, the way 60 Minutes set it up, like it was as if we were talking about millennials. It was 45 seconds in the period of 4.5 hours. He said, what do you think about the millennials and their spending habits and buying homes? And I said, look, it's incredibly tough. What a shocking situation. The baby boomers have made a fortune. They're going to come in. It's going to be very, very hard to buy property. But at the same time, you can't expect a new iPhone, the latest BMW, travel to Italy every single year or Greece every year, buy 3 coffees a day and smashed avocado for $19. 60 Minutes cut out all the stuff before and focused on the 3 coffees and smashed avocado. And yeah, it was amazing. It was like, well, coming up, as you know, they do that prequel thing on the Sunday night. I was watching it at the time, and this thing came up, millionaire smashes millennials. Like, what is going on? How is that possibly going? And then I had to sit there for 5 hours waiting to come on to see how they did it. And it was interesting. It was actually okay at the night. I didn't get that much criticism the night. Then the next day, this lady, Susie O'Brien, who I'll never forget her name ever, from the Herald Sun, wrote this headline, "Rolled Gold Wanker Smashes Millennials." And I posted it on LinkedIn and said, "Susie, here's my mobile number. Maybe next time get the facts right before you go and make stories about me giving money." She wrote the article as if I came from a wealthy family and I was given all this money to start, which is the total opposite. My family was never wealthy at the time. We were a middle-class family. And that LinkedIn post went, I think it was 1.2 million views in about 24 hours. And then I think we had 10,000 media inquiries that week. And we had media outside the office, outside my home. It was a very, very full-on period. And luckily I was going overseas on the Thursday, so I got to sneak away from it. But it was pretty much, I mean, it went, we had interviews, like there were requests from Washington and London and Ireland and all over the place. And I think it sort of started that conversation about millennials. And, I don't regret anything I said in that interview. And I think it's still accurate. And I think a lot of people now would think it's probably even more accurate. And I think it is something that this generation have to really watch carefully. But, I obviously got absolutely smashed for it, pardon the pun, but it's 99% of people were writing to me incredibly supportive. But geez, those 1% haters online are pretty full on.
I know, they're terrific, aren't they?
The tribal tweeting haters, they're unbelievable. One last question, Tim. If someone was listening to this and they have the desire to really, take on the challenges of life and try to not necessarily emulate you, but certainly, pursue their dream, what advice would you give them?
I think it's about just attacking something you love. So whatever it is, if that's architecture or design or branding or whatever it is, just get your foot in the door somewhere. I get a lot of letters and emails from people saying, "I want to be a developer and I want you to pay me to come in and do it." Like when I started with Moritz, I said to Moritz, "I'll work for nothing. I just want to learn from you." I think this generation expects everything quickly. I mean, it's not going to come quickly. There's no question. I think it's about getting your foot in the door, working out very quickly in the property sphere, because it's so wide. You've got from sales to construction to design to feasibilities to analytics. It's such a broad industry, which is why I love it so much. And it's about finding your niche and then making sure you're the best at it. I mean, you can't do well without being the top 1%. That's what you have to.
Is this, if someone's watching this program and they are in the position to maybe buy a home in the next, say, 6 months or so, would you be saying to them, look, show up right across this period of time over the next 6 months, because there could be a fantastic bargain, in your hometown, because, there are a lot of question marks that people don't know the answers to, but come maybe December, if the economy is bouncing back and people are back in work, there could be a price rebound?
Yeah, I think two things. I think firstly, I mean, if you're trying to pick a market within a few months, you're just kidding yourself. Like if you're buying a home, you should be buying for 10 to 20 years. So I don't think it's overly relevant, particularly if you're selling. If you're selling and buying in the same market, doesn't really matter if the prices are up or down in that period as long as it's the same market. I think, it's the classic Warren Buffett, do you want to buy when everyone else is buying at the top of the market, or do you want to buy when no one's buying so you can try and get a deal? And for us now, we are on a very, very aggressive site acquisition process right now. We're looking harder than we've ever looked, because it is a period of a little bit of uncertainty where you might get that slightly better deal. I'm not necessarily sure prices will drop as much as, Chris Joyo, I think, is an extremely good analyst, as you speak to a few times. I mean, he's got it pretty right over the years. And, for me, even if prices, I reckon prices have dropped 5 to 10% now, but it's irrelevant, because the people that are selling now are not the market. If you're selling now, you need to sell, and there's nowhere near enough volume to tell you what it is. And, Melbourne and Sydney went up 10% last year, so big deal, you're back to where you were last year in June. I think for me, the most important thing is that we've got to get some stability and confidence back in the market. And I think that's going to come, but there hasn't been a better time to look for a property. I mean, if you're a first home buyer or a second home buyer, this is it. I'd be absolutely out there. I'm looking heavier than we ever have before.
Tim Gurner, thanks for joining us on the program.
Thanks a lot, Peter.